So, the movie opens on Christmas Eve. A peaceful night, where a couple is fast asleep, only to be woken up by their daughter. She whispers to her mother, saying she heard footsteps on the terrace. Her mom reassures her, suggesting it's probably just an animal. But the girl innocently asks, "What if it's Santa, Mom? It's Christmas, after all." With a gentle smile, her mom agrees, maybe it is, and the girl insists on leaving out milk and cookies for Santa. The mother agrees and heads to the kitchen, placing the snacks by the fireplace. However, as she returns, she notices something unusual. The front door is wide open. Dismissing it as her husband's forgetfulness, she shuts the door and climbs back into bed. She jokingly tells her husband that their daughter has left milk and cookies for Santa, urging him to play along and eat them before morning. He grunts in agreement, and they both drift off to sleep. Meanwhile, the little girl, still awake, hears more footsteps, this time coming from inside the house. Curiosity pulls her downstairs, and what she sees sends a chill down her spine. Standing in the living room is Santa, but something about him seems off. His movements are strange, almost menacing. Terrified, the girl bolts to her brother's room, shaking him awake. "Santa is here. Let's go see him." But her brother, deep in sleep, doesn't budge. Realizing she's on her own, she creeps back downstairs, heart racing. As she peers from behind the door, she sees Santa pull an axe out of his sack. His hands are stained with blood. This isn't Santa. This is a nightmare. The man before her is none other than R the Clown, a notorious madman in a clown's disguise, known for his brutal killings. Frozen in fear, the girl watches as R the Clown heads upstairs, toward her brother's room. He enters the room silently, but with terrifying precision, swings the axe at her brother again and again, tearing him apart limb by limb. The horrifying sounds echo through the house, causing the girl to tremble uncontrollably. She knows she can't run. All she can do is hide. But the Clown isn't done. He makes his way to her parents' room. Without hesitation, he delivers a devastating blow to her father, chopping away relentlessly. The gruesome noises wake her mother, who, upon reaching out, feels her husband's lifeless, blood-soaked body beside her. In sheer panic, she starts to scream, but it's too late. The Clown continues his savage attack, slashing again and again. Her mother, horrified and drenched in her husband's blood, runs out of the room, rushing toward her children's rooms. But when she stumbles upon her son's dismembered body, her cries of grief fill the house. Her world shattered beyond repair, she rushes downstairs, her heart pounding, desperate to escape. Just as she reaches the door, the Clown appears from behind. With a swift throw, he hurls the axe at her, striking her down. He then mercilessly finishes the job, brutally eliminating her. After the blood-soaked carnage, the Clown sits down casually, indulging in the milk and cookies meant for Santa. As he wipes the blood from the plates, his gaze falls on a nearby cupboard. Opening it, he discovers the child hiding inside. The Clown's maniacal grin returns, and his twisted insanity is reignited. Without hesitation, he eliminates the child as well. Suddenly, the scene shifts to 5 years earlier, plunging us into the past. This wasn't the first time Art the Clown had unleashed such carnage. We see him wreaking havoc in a similar gruesome manner. A police officer arrives on the scene, discovering Art's severed head. He immediately radios for backup and steps further into the blood-soaked room to investigate. But just when the officer thinks the horror is over, Art, without his head, comes back to life. The officer tries to defend himself, firing his gun, but the bullets have no effect. Art grabs him from behind and overpowers him. After dispatching the officer, Art boards a train, where only a lone woman is seated. Art, holding the officer's severed head, begins to terrorize her. With the head placed on his shoulders, the scene becomes even more grotesque. The woman's terror is palpable as she tries to comprehend the horror before her. Next, the story moves to a mental asylum. A guard hears a nurse screaming from one of the cells and rushes over to investigate. What he sees is beyond comprehension. Inside the cell is a deranged patient named Vicky, who has just given birth, but not to a child. Instead, she has birthed Art's severed head. Covered in blood, Art's head is as sinister as ever, having already killed the nurse and begun devouring her body. Vicky, whose face is now horribly disfigured, appears infected by Art's evil. She, too, has become brutal and merciless, just like him. She picks up the nurse's lifeless body and begins feasting on it, her transformation into a monstrous being now complete. On the wall behind her, she scrawls a heart, inside which she writes, "Vicky plus Art," a twisted symbol of her bond with the killer clown. As the guard watches in horror, Art's severed head mysteriously reappears in the room. Before the guard can react, Vicky attacks him viciously, showing no remorse. She forces a necklace into his mouth and twists his jaw until it snaps, while Art tears apart his face in a gruesome display of brutality. With the guard dispatched, Art retrieves the head that Vicky gave birth to, and the two of them leave the asylum together. They board a train, finding their way to an abandoned house. Once inside, Vicky catches a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Overcome with rage and disgust at what she's become, she smashes the mirror with her head, spiraling further into madness. She grabs a broken shard of the mirror and sits in the bathtub. With a swift and deliberate motion, she cuts her hand, allowing her blood to fill the tub. Meanwhile, Art calmly sits in a chair across from her, watching her every move. After this, Vicky remains in the same position, lifeless for 5 years. Fast forward to the present day, the story shifts back to a young woman named Sienna, who has spent the last 5 years in a mental hospital. 5 years earlier, Art had gone on a killing spree, brutally eliminating Sienna's friends. However, in a shocking turn of events, it was Sienna who managed to decapitate Art, using a mystical weapon known as Heaven's Black Sword. Despite defeating him, the traumatic event had scarred Sienna deeply, leaving her in a state of shock and despair. Now, Sienna has recovered enough to be discharged from the hospital. Her uncle brings her home, where she is warmly greeted by her aunt and cousin. The reunion is joyful, as Sienna had always been close to her family. However, despite the happiness, a dark cloud looms over the house. At the same time, 2 workers arrive at an old, abandoned house for a routine survey. Their job is to demolish old buildings, and this house is next on the list. Inside the house, Vicky and Art's corpses are eerily preserved, trapped under a thin net. Their bodies haven't decomposed at all, as if frozen in time. Before the workers can grasp what's happening, both Art and Vicky suddenly come back to life, catching the workers off guard. With their usual cruelty, they eliminate the workers mercilessly. Back at Sienna's house, her cousin stumbles upon her old diary while rummaging through some items. Out of curiosity, he starts reading it, but Sienna quickly snatches it away, warning him never to read it again. Clearly, her past still haunts her. During a family dinner, Sienna's unease grows stronger. She suddenly sees one of her dead friends, the very one who was killed by Art 5 years ago. The vision is terrifying, her friend's body mangled and torn. But no one else can see it, leaving Sienna trapped in her own haunted mind. It becomes clear that she hasn't fully escaped the trauma of the past. Meanwhile, Sienna's brother is staying at a hostel, where he reconnects with 2 of his friends. One of them, a girl, has started a job hosting a crime podcast. She interviews people who have witnessed real-life crimes, fascinated by their first-hand experiences. When she learns about Sienna's brother, she becomes eager to interview him, knowing that both he and Sienna had encountered Art, a notorious killer. Obsessed with the story, she chases after him, pleading for an interview. Her fascination with Art borders on admiration, making her even more persistent. Sienna's brother, however, is terrified and uncomfortable. Although reluctant, he promises to think about it and let her know. Later, Sienna calls her brother, telling him she misses him and wants to see him. She asks him to come home for a visit, yearning for the comfort of family. Meanwhile, back at the abandoned house, Art and Vicky are plotting their next move. Art is devising a new, even more twisted method of torture. Knowing that wounds hurt more in the cold, Art has come up with a chilling idea, literally. His cruel new experiment involves freezing his victims to maximize their pain. He starts by testing his twisted theory on a small mouse, subjecting it to freezing temperatures to see how much agony he can inflict. Art's sadistic experiments foreshadow the gruesome horrors yet to come. Art, after successfully testing his twisted freezing method on the mouse, breaks it like a fragile toy. His sinister smile widens. This was just a prelude to what he plans for humans. Feeling gleeful, he sets out to find his next victim. Art arrives at a lively bar where a group of people are sitting, one of whom is dressed as Santa Claus. Initially, Art engages in light-hearted conversation, cracking jokes and blending in with the group. But as the moments pass, his demeanor shifts, and he begins to subtly torment the man dressed as Santa. He teases and toys with him, gradually escalating his behavior in the sadistic way he tortures his victims. When the group finally grows tired of his antics and attempts to confront him, Art swiftly pulls out a bag from nowhere. Without hesitation, he pulls out a gun and shoots everyone, coldly eliminating them, except for the man in Santa's costume. This one, Art had something special planned for. He ties the man to a chair, watching as the terror grows in his eyes. Art begins the torture by freezing the man's body, gradually turning him into a living statue of ice. Once satisfied with the man's helplessness, Art pulls out a hammer and begins his brutal attack, smashing him mercilessly. The gruesome scene plays out like a twisted art piece, as Art hammers away until the man's body is completely destroyed. Meanwhile, back at home, Sienna stumbles upon an old letter from her brother. In the letter, her brother explains that sometimes demons from hell find their way into the human world. These demons are powerful but cannot act on their own. They need the help of a recently deceased evil person to manifest their dark intentions. The letter further explains that just as there are demons, there are also angels, being sent to protect humanity. These angels are capable of eliminating demons, and one of them is Sienna herself. The letter reminds Sienna that she was the one who eliminated Art with the Heaven's Black Sword, and warns her that if the demon ever returns, it will be her responsibility to stop him again. Later, we find Sienna and her cousin shopping in a busy mall. Suddenly, Sienna is struck by the sound of people screaming in the distance, a noise that sends chills down her spine. A deep fear begins to grip her. Could Art have returned? Her instincts scream yes. As she scans the crowd, her heart nearly stops when she sees a figure dressed in Santa's clothes, covered in blood, with a mask covering his face. Sienna's eyes widen in horror. She knows, without a doubt, that this is Art. He points directly at her, his menacing presence unmistakable. Terrified, she freezes in place. But just then, her cousin approaches her from behind, snapping her out of the moment. Sienna quickly looks back in the direction where she saw Art, but he's vanished, as if he was never there. Rattled, Sienna rushes home and tells her brother about the incident. She explains that she saw Art in the mall today, dressed as Santa, but she couldn't see his face because of the mask. Still, she insists it was him. She could feel it in her bones. Her brother, trying to calm her down, replies, "How can this be? You must be mistaken. You killed Art, remember? His game is over. I've moved on from that nightmare, and you should too." But Sienna knows deep down that Art is far from gone. Something dark is looming once again. Sienna, sensing the urgency of the situation, shows her brother the letter. In it, she explains the terrifying truth that a demon like Art can only enter the human world through the body of a recently deceased evil person. Previously, Art had manifested with the help of a wicked girl, but this time, he returned through Vicky, which is why he's gone missing from the mental asylum. Her brother's face pales with fear as he takes in the gravity of the situation. "What do we do now?" he stammers. "Do we go to the police? Run away from town? Or should we tell Uncle and Aunt?" Sienna shakes her head, her expression grim. "It won't help. They won't believe us. They already think I'm crazy." Her voice steadies with determination. "The only way to defeat Art is by finding the magical sword again. That's our only hope." Meanwhile, in the mall, Art sits disguised as Santa. He had brutally eliminated the real Santa, wearing his beard and skin like a grotesque mask. With a chilling smile, he hands a gift to a little girl. Soon, more children gather around him, eagerly awaiting their turn, oblivious to the horror beneath the facade. Art happily hands out gifts to each one, his bag slowly emptying. But the mothers start noticing something unsettling. This Santa looks wrong. His movements are strange, his face twisted in an eerie grin. People around the mall begin to realize this isn't the same Santa they saw earlier. Suspicion grows, and soon, mall security steps in, ushering Art away. However, just as the situation seems to settle, a horrifying event unfolds. The gifts that Art handed out, each one is rigged with a bomb. As one of the children excitedly opens her present, a massive explosion rocks the entire mall. Panic ensues as fire engulfs the building, and screams fill the air. The blast claims the lives of everyone inside, leaving devastation and chaos in its wake. Amid the madness, Sienna finally finds the magical sword, hidden away in a gift box. Her cousin, however, catches her in the act. Trying to divert the conversation, her cousin blurts out, You like series, don't you? Sienna's eyes narrow, suspicion creeping into her voice. Wait, how do you know that? I never told you I liked series. Realization hits her as she steps closer to her cousin. You've been reading my diary, haven't you? Caught off guard, her cousin sheepishly admits, yes, sorry. I read it after you told me not to. I just wanted to understand what happened to you. The things you wrote about Art the clown. Are they all true? Sienna, still wary, but protective of her cousin, quickly lies. It's just a story. You don't need to worry about any of it. Inside, though, she knows the danger is all too real, and her mission to stop Art has only just begun. Sienna, trying to deflect, says, "No, I'm just not feeling well. It's making me think of strange things. That's all I write about." Her cousin, curious and a little disappointed, asks, "Wait, so you didn't actually chop off Art's head with that magical sword?" Sienna shakes her head, and her cousin sighs in frustration. "Ugh, that's such a letdown. I was really getting into the story." Sienna, sensing the need for secrecy, quickly responds, "Listen, whatever you've read in my diary, whatever you think you know, please don't tell anyone. Can you promise me that?" Her cousin nods reluctantly. "Fine, I promise." But the conversation doesn't end there. In the hostel, Sienna's cousin shares her growing obsession with Art's story to another friend. She says, "I really want to do this. I need to interview Sienna. I want to understand the terror Art brings, to feel what it's like to be near something so evil. I want to see how he smiles." Unbeknownst to them, Art had already infiltrated the hostel, lurking in the shadows, listening. Amused, he thought to himself, so, she wants to feel me up close? Fine, I'll make sure she gets exactly what she asked for, Meanwhile, Sienna was glued to her TV, watching the news about the mall explosion. The commentators were speculating that it was the work of some enemy force, but Sienna knew the truth. This was Art's doing. Fear gripped her as she frantically called her brother, warning him. "It's him. Art's back. You need to come home now." "Did you bring the sword?" her brother asked, his voice tense. "Yes, I have it," she replied. He agreed to return home, but as Sienna hung up, the danger was already closing in. At the hostel, her uncle arrived to pick up her brother. Inside, her brother's friend, the host of the crime podcast, and another friend were chatting in the bathroom. Little did they know, Art had already entered. Without warning, he launched his brutal attack, wielding a chainsaw. He first went after her friend, cutting deep and relentlessly. Then he turned to the host, his smile widening as he pressed the chainsaw against her skull, crushing her face until it was unrecognizable. But she was still alive, barely clinging to life. Art grinned sadistically, leaned in close, and whispered, "You wanted to feel me? Well, this is what it's like. Do you feel me now?" With that, he delivered the final blow, ending her life. As a sick twist, he placed her glasses on her mangled face. Turning his attention back to the other friend who lay bleeding out on the ground, Art's brutal nature flared up once more. He bisected her with a chainsaw, delivering an agonizing, torturous death. Meanwhile, back at home, Sienna is startled awake by a terrifying dream. She sees that it's 2 a.m. and her uncle and aunt are still awake as she hears them talking. When Sienna goes downstairs to check, she is horrified to find that it wasn't her uncle and aunt, but Vicky, imitating their voices. Meanwhile, Art had already killed her uncle. He had removed his head and was nailing the rest of his body to the wall. Now, a small, eerie version of Art steps forward to attack Sienna. Although she tries to fight back, she realizes she can't defend herself without a sword. She tries to reach for the sword, but then the small Art attacks her with a hammer, knocking her unconscious. When Sienna regains consciousness, she finds herself tied to a chair, with her aunt tied to another chair across from her. In the middle, on a table, something was wrapped. Vicky approaches her aunt and removes the tape from her mouth. Her aunt cries and asks, "Where is my daughter? What did you do to her?" In response, Vicky calls Art and reveals the wrapped object. It's actually a cage holding a severed head, now being eaten by rats. The head is so decomposed that it looks like a skull, making it unrecognizable. Her aunt cries in disbelief, saying, "No, this is a lie. I don't believe you. This can't be my son's head." At this, they begin torturing her. Vicky places a rat in her aunt's mouth using a tube, then slashes her throat and pulls the rat back out through it, mercilessly killing her in front of Sienna's eyes. Vicky then places a crown of thorns on Sienna's head and says, "Yes, this is really not your cousin's head." She adds that she'll bring her cousin's head as well. Then, Art places a pair of glasses on the head, signaling that it belongs to Sienna's brother. Upon hearing this, Sienna loses control and starts screaming in agony. Vicky orders her to be quiet, saying, "Listen to me. There is no God here." She starts to strangle Sienna, intending to destroy her faith in God and break her spirit, so she could take control of her. But Sienna was so strong that she neither lost her faith in herself nor broke her courage. Despite Vicky's best attempts, she couldn't control her. Now, Vicky wanted to kill Sienna's cousin right in front of her. Art placed a knife at her cousin's neck, but then her cousin got an idea. She said, "Okay, you two are angels, right? So please, fulfill my last wish. Before you kill me, I want to open a gift of mine." Both of them agreed. This was the same box where Sienna had kept the magical sword. Her cousin knew that only this sword could defeat these demons. She also insisted that Sienna be the one to open the box. The gift box was handed to Sienna, but before she could open it, Art struck her hand, breaking her fingers. Even after enduring this pain, she managed to open the box. To her surprise, her hands healed on their own as soon as she took hold of the magical sword. Now it was Sienna's turn to attack. She pulled out the sword, slashed Art's throat, and threw the sword at Vicky, piercing her chest. She retrieved the sword and stabbed it into Vicky's mouth, finally blowing her head apart. And just like that, Vicky was defeated. But Art seized an opportunity to attack her. Now that she had the magical sword, she struck him back, blocking each of his attacks. A fierce fight broke out between them, and in the end, Sienna gained the upper hand. She drove the sword into Art's stomach and pinned him against the wall. However, Vicky's blood turned acidic, causing the ground to melt and crack. A light-filled path opened beneath where Sienna's cousin was standing, and she fell. She clung to the wall to avoid falling further. Seeing her cousin in danger, Sienna left Art and went to save her. She held out the sword to help her cousin climb up, but her cousin's grip slipped, and Sienna also lost her balance. Her cousin fell into the abyss, holding onto the sword. Sienna was heartbroken watching this, but she vowed to herself, "I'll go to hell if I have to. I will bring my cousin and the sword back." But then, she noticed that Art was no longer there. The window was open, meaning he had escaped, a troubling sign. After that, we see a girl on a bus, reading a book about demons. Art comes and sits beside her, starting to frighten the girl. This meant the cycle of bloodshed was about to begin again. To stop Art, Sienna would have to go to hell to retrieve the magical sword, and she would chase him down once more. With this horrific ending, the movie concludes. Thanks for watching.